Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll get started.
This story begins in Florade County, specifically in the Earl's estate, which was incredibly huge. A man and his wife were standing outside drinking tea. He turned to his daughter and told her to get married. The girl, hearing this, immediately agreed. She was a little worried, but still did it after so much begging from her parents. The man, without even listening to her, immediately began to say that he knew she would refuse and that he understood her. But she had to think about his situation, about what people would say. But then, he suddenly realized that she had said that she agreed, and immediately fell silent. Together with his wife, he looked at his daughter and was very surprised. They couldn't believe that she actually said that and immediately asked, "Is this really true?" The girl didn't see anything unusual in this and immediately asked what was happening to them. Her father started shouting at her and said that he didn't believe that she wanted to say that she would really marry the Duke of Balfour because she had cried, saying that she couldn't even breathe next to him. Her mother, of course, was also very surprised and asked her child if she had accidentally gotten sick, and also added that they, of course, were not forcing her, and she could say whatever she felt was necessary. The girl, having heard all this, was very surprised. She even felt a little sad, because she did not expect that her parents could see her in such a way. Of course, she lay on her bed for all her 22 years, citing that she was having a hard time, and also that she had no debut in society. And for 16 hours out of the entire day, she just slept and did nothing, did not interact with strangers in any way, because she simply did not like it. Her father at this point began to get very worried. He didn't know what she would say in the end, so he just looked at her and bit his lips from excitement. The girl, remembering all this, decided not to think about it too much anymore. Otherwise, she would fall in her own eyes. Therefore, it was better for her to just throw these thoughts away. Her dad was silent for a while, and then said that he certainly understood that the king himself had recommended him. However, he should refuse and think carefully before making a final decision. But the girl, smiling happily, said that she would marry the Duke of Balfour, and so she asked them to calm down already. Her parents, as soon as they heard this, were ready to burst into tears, which is exactly what the father did. He hugged his wife and could not believe that their daughter had actually agreed. The girl, in turn, simply sat and watched everything that was happening. She was Sylvia Florade and the only daughter of the Count. The parents were ready to do absolutely anything for their physically weak daughter. The Count and Countess bought her countless outfits and jewelry in order to console her a little because her life was not what it could have been. However, Sylvia did not really need all this. She asked for a better bed, and the rest was of no use to her at all. When her parents suggested that she make her debut, she said that she didn't care. It would be very difficult, and asked if she could not arrange it at all, because she knew that she wouldn't be able to handle it. Sylvia even began to eat less. She spent all her time in her room, on her bed, and even had little contact with her parents. She had her own peculiarities, which many people, of course, did not understand. However, her parents had to accept her as she was. Of course, her father was very worried, and did not understand who would take care of her if they suddenly died prematurely. The wife immediately turned to him and asked him not to say such terrible things because she didn't even want to think about it. But the man still believed that this was true. They were not eternal, so no one would be able to take care of their daughter when they were gone, unless something was done about it now. The woman, of course, felt very sad about this because she herself understood perfectly well that it was true. So they realized that they had only one thing left to do. Before they died, they had to find her a worthy husband, even despite Sylvia's own wishes. But unfortunately, they couldn't find a suitable candidate for quite a long time and had almost given up. And then suddenly, His Majesty offered them the Duke of Belfort, so they immediately told their daughter about it, and she immediately agreed. Because of this, the man cried from happiness for a very long time because he could not believe that it was really true. He believed that now, even if they died, there would be someone to take care of their dear Sylvia. The woman herself was very happy and agreed with him. They rejoiced for quite a long time, and the girl simply sat next to them and continued drinking tea, not understanding why they reacted so violently to this. In fact, the Belfort Duchy was a place where various monsters often appeared that could easily kill a person, and she considered this quite an unexpected piece of luck for herself, since she had been having a hard time for some time finding a way to die. Her parents continued to rejoice and said that now they could only be happy for their dear daughter. Sylvia didn't tell her parents why exactly she agreed to this, so she just smiled and said that it was all right. Some time passed from that moment, and finally the very day of the wedding in the Duchy of Belfort arrived. People gathered around and happily talked among themselves, because they themselves were very happy that Duke Belfort was finally marrying someone. He was the master of their lands, and the people, particularly the knights, were simply delighted by the fact that the man would no longer be alone. The Duke himself was incredibly irritated by all this, because even his closest assistants followed him everywhere and sang songs to him about how he would soon get married. And then at one point, the man simply couldn't take it anymore. He started yelling at them, asking why they were doing such stupid things, and also asked if they really decided to make fun of him in this way. This young blonde guy's name was Randall Belfort, and he was the Duke himself, as well as the second person after the Crown Prince who had the right of succession to the throne. People, hearing this, immediately laughed and said that of course they were not making fun of him, but simply wanted to congratulate him with all their hearts. Someone also joked that he should never think about yelling at his future wife like he did at them. The man didn't answer this. He sighed heavily, thought about how until recently this girl had been against marriage, but now everything had changed, and this surprised him very much. A few days ago, at the Elvira's palace, the boy met with a man to discuss some news. The king told Duke Belfort that he thought it was time for him to look for a wife for himself, of course. As soon as the guy heard this, he was shocked. With a trembling voice, he immediately asked what he was saying, and the man replied that Count Fleuret was just looking for a groom for his daughter, and he believed that this would be the ideal candidate. The king also explained that Flora's family had a long and rich history, and their family would be a perfect fit for him, so he would not want to hear any denials. Looking at Randall, he immediately asked the guy what he thought about it. He himself was silent for a while, not knowing what to answer. It was a coercion disguised as a proposal. The boy could not believe that the king wanted to tie his hands and feet in marriage for fear that he might gain power and strength. Of course, he would very much like to refuse, but his territory was limited to the land of the demons Kletvaya, and if he made a hasty decision, then the food supply to his land could quickly stop. Randall knew it was better not to risk the lives of many people by resisting the king, and for his own interests, he did not want to kill innocent civilians. So he accepted the king's proposal and said that he would be happy to await the bride's response. The knights around were incredibly happy as soon as they learned that he was really going to be married, and so they tried everywhere to remind the man of this. Rand already understood that they already knew everything perfectly well, and that was why they were behaving as if they had been gathered together joyfully in order to cheer them up. People were saying that he would no longer be a lone wolf and would finally find a girl who could be by his side. Then Rendraful was fed up with all this and said that they didn't understand in a good way since they didn't stop, and upon returning to Roy, they would have a hard morning training session so that they definitely wouldn't relax. The boys weren't too happy to hear this, but they had no choice. Meanwhile, the Duke approached Austin and asked if the magic circle was ready to get to the capital. The man looked at him with a tired look and said that it was true. He had been preparing it all night and was therefore dying of fatigue, but he had to leave already before it closed. Randall looked at Austin in surprise and felt a little embarrassed for having put so much pressure on him, but thanked him and said that he would do so, and also said that the guy was a great guy. After this, the man touched this magic circle and it shone even brighter and also increased in size. Before going inside, Randall thought that it would be very nice if he could get along with his bride, but a feeling of anxiety still haunted him. He didn't yet know whether Flores County could be counted among the king's supporters, so he wasn't sure how exactly to treat her. Then he went first and said that he would already be setting off on his journey, and he himself very much hoped that he would not have to kill his own wife. Meanwhile, at the Alvarez wedding hall, Sylvia's parents were already prepared for the ceremony itself and came in to talk to her. As soon as the father saw the girl in a wedding dress, he again could not hold back his tears because she was incredibly beautiful and delightful. Having calmed down a little, he said that if the Duke or his family suddenly treated her badly, then she must definitely return home. Father also said that they would try with all their might, if necessary, to live longer than she did. Mother agreed and said that if she was dissatisfied with something, she should turn everything upside down there in order to take revenge on them. Even though she herself understood that the girl did not have enough strength for this, she still insisted. Sylvia, smiling, said that everything would be fine and they should not worry about her. She also said that they would see each other in the hall, and the parents, turning towards the exit, agreed with her. Meanwhile, the girl came closer to the mirror and thought that if she suddenly had no luck, she would have to live a long life that she did not even want. Belfort entered her room, and she curtsied, greeted him, and also said that she was very glad to meet him. The girl also said that from now on she will be called Sylvia Florette Belfort, and she is very happy to have the honor of bearing his name. In fact, the girl did not want all this, because in this case she would have to live her 100th life, which she did not want at all. And that's true. That's how many times Alice was reborn. In her first life, she was a ray of light, a great sorceress who fought demons in the war. Everyone praised Alice, and she continued to fight demons with the same willingness, because it was her calling. Alice did everything to protect happiness from those people, absolutely everything. And in order to finally eradicate those demons, she devoted a lot of time to studying demonic power and even explored the darkness. And after this time, little by little, but Alice was able to learn to use the power of darkness. So she was able to open a portal to the world of demons. Alice was overjoyed, so she immediately shared this with the humans. However, they pushed her into the gate that led to the demonic world. And while the girl was flying into this abyss, she did not understand why they did this to her. But in fact, people simply became victims of fear of Alice's growing power. The girl, finding herself in the demonic world, did not understand how and why this happened, what she was guilty of, because she, on the contrary, always helped people and wished them only good. She wanted to help them get rid of the demons and live a happy life. And so Alice did not understand why they did this to her. And she was especially scared because in the demonic world, of course, there were many monsters. Several years have passed since then, and Alice was able to fight the demons alone and eventually reached their king, whose name was Basis. When she cut his throat, she rose to the very top of this world. Well, by that time, Alice was no longer human. In a fit of madness, she attacked the human world. The people fled, but even so, they became victims of her ruthlessness. When the human mouth was one step away from destruction, there appeared a man who was a hero, Cleon. He used his sword magic and killed Alice, and the demon queen left this cruel world. But immediately after that, the girl opened her eyes, finding herself in a completely new place. For some time, she did not understand what was happening, because she clearly remembered how she was killed. Suddenly, an unknown voice addressed her, calling her a fallen soul, and also said that Alice had taken many lives with the forbidden power of darkness, and that is why they decided to punish her in proportion to her sins. The essence of this god's punishment was that she must live another 99 lives. Of course, sometimes it was so hard for her that she decided to commit suicide. But Alice could not die of her own free will, and by the end of her term, she was already incredibly tired, and even when her last life as Sylvia came, she simply did not know what to do. Because the girl had attempted suicide quite often, she was warned that if she tried again this time, her sentence would be increased. So Sylvia knew that she couldn't die in this life, so she was a little sad and decided to just live this life as boringly as possible. As soon as the man noticed the girl, he did not understand what was wrong with her. After all, he had never met Lady Flora before, but he did not know why she looked so sad and thoughtful. When Sylvia looked at him, she smiled and said that it was time for them to go to the ceremony so as not to be late. The man smiled awkwardly and said that they really should go now. He took her hand and thought that he must have thought she looked sad, because now the girl was smiling and looked very happy. Then they finally entered the hall where the ceremony was to take place. Everything around was decorated with flowers, and there were also a lot of guests gathered there. The boy and the girl walked side by side and did not say a single word to each other. They simply held hands and approached the altar. As they walked, the man noticed the girl's appearance and body structure. He noticed that she was quite small and very thin. Then he turned away and thought that, of course, he was not going to get close to her and have any feelings. But he still decided that she needed to be well fed, because in this way, it was easy to get hurt and also get sick. Sylvia, however, did not show any enthusiasm. She noticed that he had a kind look and thought that there should be no problems if she fulfilled her marital duties. And so they finally stopped in front of the priest, who said, "Since everyone is ready, then we can begin the wedding ceremony between Randall Belfort and Sylvia Florade." The guests immediately fell silent because they wanted to hear everything. And the girl's parents became emotional again, especially her father, because he was very emotional. Soon the bride and groom exchanged their rings, and everyone around immediately began to applaud. Then the priest said that since all the traditions had been observed, he could pronounce them husband and wife, and that they should finally seal the day and their status with a kiss. As soon as Reynold heard this, he was very surprised. He felt very awkward because he knew that the girl was 3 years younger than him. His guests at that moment immediately began to smile and could barely contain their laughter, because they knew perfectly well what the man was feeling right now. He looked at them and immediately realized that if he kissed her now, they would definitely not leave him alone with their mockery. Of course, he didn't care about it, but the girl would probably be very embarrassed, so he thought it was better to just pretend that they did it. When he turned and looked at Sylvia again, he saw her complete calm. She did not react to this in any way and simply waited for him to do everything himself. The man decided to get out of the situation. He raised the bouquet up and simply moved as close to her lips as possible, but did not kiss her. They stood like that for a while, and after that Randall thought that this would be enough, and was about to move away, when suddenly she turned to him in a whisper. Sylvia looked at him with a surprised voice and asked him to come closer. As soon as the guy heard this, he was very surprised, but he remained standing in place. The girl decided to take the situation into her own hands and then immediately kissed him straight on the lips, which embarrassed him incredibly. After that, she moved away from him, thinking that such a kiss would be quite enough. She also took a few steps back from him, thinking that she needed to be careful, because God was watching her, and it was necessary to create the impression of an idol. Randall blushed at this point. He hadn't expected the girl to do something like that, and he simply didn't know what to do now. But soon everything calmed down. The young couple changed their clothes and went to the ball, which was organized in honor of their wedding. The girls who were standing on the sides and drinking suddenly noticed that the young people had come out to the center of the room to dance. The aristocrats immediately began to whisper. As soon as they saw the girl, they were not sure whether she was even human, because they had never seen her before, and she looked very pale. One of the girls said that she was definitely not of this world and did not know how it was possible to be so beautiful. They thought that those who spread terrible rumors about Lady Flora were certainly not going to show up at such events anytime soon. Then they started talking about her fiancé, Duke Belfort. No young lady could take her eyes off him, so all the ladies thought that they were just the perfect couple and were perfect for each other. In fact, Sylvia was not as happy as everyone else because she was already very tired and did not understand why they were organizing such banquets at all. How she hoped that the wedding night would come as soon as possible, so that she would have already completed everything and would not feel any obligations to them. Randall, while they were dancing, looked at her and was very surprised, because he could not believe that this girl was really 22 years old. He thought she looked quite mature for a count's daughter, and he even found it strange. The man was constantly embarrassed and did not know how to address her now. The girl, as if reading his thoughts, said that he could simply call her by her first name, Sylvia. It would be easier for everyone. Seeing his surprised expression, she immediately explained that she thought he was thinking about how to address her, so she decided to make things a little easier. The guy was genuinely surprised. However, she continued to speak and said that if he didn't like her name, he could call her wife, darling, beloved. Whenever he wanted, she wouldn't object. Randall so much that he couldn't even say anything. He just stood there, wide-eyed, looking at her, continuing to dance. He immediately thought that, most likely, since she understood what he was thinking, it was all written on his face, and decided that in the future it would be better to practice on his facial expressions. After a moment of silence, he said that she could also call him Randall and speak to him informally. He explained that he doesn't really like all that formal stuff, so he finds it much more comfortable to just have friendly conversations between them. Sylvia was a little surprised to hear this. Then, smiling, she said that he was quite a good man, and she liked it. The man simply thanked her. When they finished the dance, they bowed to each other, and at that very moment, the maid approached the girl. This meant that she had to go and change, so Sylvia turned to her now husband and said that she would be back very soon. He did not object. Then she left the ballroom with the maid, and Randall stood for a while and watched her go. Florid and his wife approaching him. They were Sylvia's parents, and they looked rather worried. The man immediately bowed, greeted them, and said that the lady had gone to change her outfit and should return very soon. He also said with a smile on his face that he would try his best to create conditions so that their daughter would not need anything. And he warned that if he was not good enough, if he could not live up to their expectations, then they would definitely be able to count him out. As soon as Sylvia's parents heard this, they immediately felt very pleased and realized that they were giving their daughter into the right hands. The girl's mother immediately smiled and said that they trusted him with their daughter and really hoped that everything would be fine. And the guy replied that they shouldn't worry about her. She was in good hands now. He also said that before leaving, he would like to ask them a few questions, so that there would be no misunderstandings. Her father was a little surprised, but immediately asked what interested him, because he was ready to answer everything that was needed. Randall came closer to him and asked in a quiet voice, Was it really true that their daughter had only been in the estate for 22 years and had not gone beyond its borders? Quite a lot of time had passed since then. The guy had time to figure everything out, and the ball was already over. It was time for them to go to his estate. The man stood near the carriage with a very sad expression on his face, because after what he had learned, he could not be cheerful, and waited for the girl to say goodbye to her parents. Sylvia hugged her father, who was crying again and could not contain his emotions, and said goodbye verbally to her mother, who was much more reserved. In fact, the man explained to Randall that their daughter never even left her chambers. She was naturally very lethargic, so sometimes she could sleep for days on end. So they warned him not to be too surprised by this. Her personal record was 3 days of continuous sleep. So if anything happened, it was better to just not disturb her. But wait. Randall was very upset by this. He did not understand how this was even possible, and decided that it would be necessary to send her for a walk at least once a day, so that her muscles did not atrophy, and she would at least be active. At that moment, Austin approached him and said that the magic circle for the return was already ready. The guy, who was deep in thought, was a little scared, but when he saw his assistant, he said that he was a good boy. Then he came closer to his bride, and holding out his hand, said that they should leave already, because the time had come. Sylvia looked at him for a while, but then, smiling, she took his hand and they went. She also thought that he was quite cute. When everyone was ready, the man turned to them and said that they could leave. Everyone immediately set off. People were lined up in columns on horses and carriages, and immediately headed towards the portal. Sylvia sat in the carriage and looked out. In fact, she was thinking about her husband, and was very surprised that he was so kind, and she even felt a little ashamed that she was not what he expected. But she thought that it was very good that he turned out to be quite a nice person, because after her death, Randall would easily find himself a new match. Some time passed from that moment, and the girl even fell asleep, because this was her usual routine. When she opened her eyes again, the landscape had already changed. It took her a while to remember what had happened, but now the creature came to her better. She was now very far from the parents she had become accustomed to, from their happy faces and worried looks. In fact, she hadn't been out for such a long time and was even a little tired. She really wanted to go to her bed and get a good night's sleep. But she thought that on this day she needed to give it her all, because their first wedding night was coming up very soon, and she needed to gather strength and enthusiasm so that everything would go well. Randall, who was riding ahead with his mage, suddenly heard someone say something. He thought it was his friend. However, he remained silent. He was a little surprised and thought that he had misheard, and also asked Austin why the guy was so downcast and even sad. The guy asked, "How could it be otherwise? After all, he just went through this second-rate portal that looks good?" Randall told him that in that case, they would have arrived at the estate long ago, because the guy was one of the most outstanding magicians, and it would be better for him to create this portal. They would have spent half the time. The man sighed heavily and said that he didn't understand why he would create one, since he had already used up all his mana that morning, and he definitely wouldn't have enough strength to create a new portal. However, for an additional fee, he would certainly consider this proposal. But it is already too late, so he considers it pointless to discuss all this. Austin also said that if he wasn't going to pay, nothing would come of it. The Duke sighed heavily, thought that this guy was very mercenary, and was surprised by this. But Randall said he had often wandered through the area as a child, so he thought it would be nice to walk through the area again. It brought back pleasant memories that had long since faded from his mind. He said that he was really just saying this because he wanted to get back to the estate as soon as possible. After that, the guys rode in silence because they knew that if they said another word, they would hurt each other very much. At that moment, when they drove into the depths of the forest, Randall suddenly heard the howling of animals, just like Sylvia. The girl, hearing this, immediately became wary. Then the Duke turned to Austin and asked him to create a barrier that would cover the forest area. The man immediately ran to his wife's carriage and told her not to open the windows and not to give away her presence. He tried to calm her down, saying that everything would be fine. She just needed to wait. The knights who accompanied them immediately began to prepare for battle, because they understood that the monsters could attack at any moment, and they would need to defend themselves at any cost. Randall was the first to see the monster. It was a huge creature that looked like a wolf, but also like a bear. The boy shouted loudly to his knights and told them to draw their swords and protect the carriage in every possible way. The knights immediately surrounded the carriage from all sides and were ready to defend themselves. However, this monster was not alone. A whole multitude of them came running. They got up from their horses and began to defend themselves on the ground. One of the knights asked how much longer they would have to kill these pirates, and the other guy replied that he was very surprised because it was their first time in this forest. However, he did not understand why it happened on this particular day. Then these monsters, after they were killed, began to arrive in new flocks and mercilessly attacked these people. Randall dealt with the monsters with ease, and then suddenly when he killed one, before he could look back, two more began to attack him. He sighed heavily and felt very sorry for Sylvia because on her first day, as soon as she found herself in this area, she had already seen monsters, and he could only imagine how scared she was because of this. He assumed that she was sitting there, trembling with fear. However, in reality, this was not the case. Sylvia was very calm, but her companion was completely exhausted. She turned to the lady and asked what they should do. Some time passed from then on, and Geoffrey, who was a knight of the Duchy of Belfort, killed another monster, thinking that there were still a few left to deal with and everything would be over. Of course, this was to be expected from the master. He was very surprised, but he was able to destroy half of the monsters on his own and thus made the work of all the other knights easier. Then the guy suddenly turned around because he heard some rustling in the bushes and saw two small children. Because of this, he was very surprised. One boy smiled happily and said that, as he had said, they had finally found their way. His friend immediately became happy and said that he was very happy. But at that moment, the boy suddenly looked at Geoffrey, and seeing the man was very surprised and, of course, scared. Even he did not expect to meet strangers in the middle of the forest. And the commander himself was very surprised. He did not understand what the children were doing in such a dangerous place. He immediately stood in front of them and told them to run away from here immediately. The boy took out his sword and saw the monster starting to approach them, but the boys couldn't do anything about it. They were so scared, so they just stood there and shook. Geoffrey felt incredibly sorry for them. They were scared to death, and because of this, they couldn't even move, despite the fact that they were in danger. He knew he had to protect them. However, at that moment, the monster reacted much faster than the boy himself and grabbed him by the face, throwing him to the side of the carriage. Geoffrey was breathing very heavily. He touched one of his wounds and was also covered in blood. The guy became disarmed and did not know what to do. But the creature started to approach him and growled very loudly before trying to kill him. At that very moment, the door and most likely also broke a little. When the Duke noticed this, he immediately became very scared and understood that he could not just stand and watch all this. When he was about to approach, he suddenly saw that the door had completely fallen open and Sylvia appeared from there, looking a little surprised and confused. Randall was overcome with fear and horror because he clearly saw how this monster began to approach the girl, and he did not know if he would be able to save her because he was quite far from the carriage. He immediately shouted loudly, addressing Sylvia, but the girl herself simply stood in place and closed her eyes, awaiting her fate. She did this on purpose because she wanted to end this life already. The next time she opened her eyes, she noticed that no one had killed her because one of the monsters had attacked another, and they were now fighting. The monsters paid no attention to Sylvia. One of them killed the other, and Geoffrey, who had been lying at the foot of the carriage all this time, was surprised. He was about to ask what was going on. However, the girl put her finger to her lips and told him to be quiet. The man did not understand anything. However, at that moment, his eyes suddenly turned red and he lost consciousness. By that time, all the creatures were already dead. The Duke immediately ran to Sylvia because he was very worried and wanted to make sure personally that everything was okay with her. Randall asked her in a worried voice if she was okay and if she was hurt. The girl replied that she was fine, but this night was really bad. As soon as the guy saw Geoffrey, he was very surprised. The other team immediately started running up to him and asking him to hold on and not die. People tried to stop the bleeding to try to save his life at least a little. A doctor ran up to them and told them to turn him on his side so that it would be easier to look at the wound and take some measures. Sylvia, who was standing next to the Duke, suddenly noticed that he had become very tense. He had even clenched his hand into a fist, and it was shaking a lot. Of course, the girl was surprised by such a reaction, but she decided to calm him down a little, so she extended her hand and took his. As soon as the man felt her hand on his, he couldn't believe that she actually did it. He didn't expect it, and so he was able to distract himself a little, so that his hand stopped shaking. The girl immediately turned to the man and said that everything was fine. He shouldn't worry too much, and smiling, she said that he definitely wouldn't die. Therefore, Sylvia suggested hurrying to the estate so that the whole situation could be sorted out calmly there. Some time had passed since then. They had already reached the estate, and Geoffrey had been put in order. The guy had even woken up. He laughed and said that he had thought he was going to die, but he was very glad that things didn't turn out that way. One of the knights replied that he should thank Austin for this, because it was he who spent his last strength in order to create a magic circle for a quick teleportation to the palace. Jeffrey, meanwhile, turned to the lady and asked her forgiveness for pestering her on the first day of their acquaintance in such an absurd manner. The girl, smiling happily, said that he shouldn't worry about it at all. She was really glad that he was okay, and that was enough. Joffrey immediately thanked her and then began to talk about the children he had met with the Duke. Sylvia then thought that it was a good thing that everything had happened this way. She understood that apparently her magic had worked very well, since the guy didn't remember anything. In fact, the girl could not even imagine that the day would come when she would again use magic and darkness at the same time, and she did not even notice that some magic had happened. It's just that when that terrible monster ran towards her, she was ready to die. But she didn't really want to die such a horrible death right in front of little children, so she decided to do everything differently. And besides, at that moment she glanced at her husband, who continued to talk to Jeffrey, and realized that in such a situation he called her and was very worried. Randall at this point told his knight that his monthly salary would be cut a little, because he needed to recover, and that would take a lot of time. But the guy himself did not object, because he still felt pretty awful. Sylvia thought that seeing the body of his torn-up wife on the very first day of their life together would be a great blow for him, and he was such a sweetheart. Of course, the girl was a little sorry that she couldn't die that day. However, she understood that this was not the last chance to do so, so she decided that she could at least wait a little. She also decided that it was a good thing Austin was away from her at the time. If he had been nearby, he would have definitely sensed her magic, and it would have been even more of a hassle. Sylvia also understood that she had to be more careful from now on, because she was a simple person who was not capable of using magic. At that moment, the maid entered the room and, turning to the gentleman and lady, said that they needed to go out because they were already expected. As soon as the boy and the girl heard this, they were very surprised, because they did not expect that anyone would want to meet them, and they had just returned. However, as soon as they stepped out into the corridor, they were immediately greeted by the butler and the head maid. They greeted Sylvia and said their names. The butler's name was Walter and the head maid was Delma, and they were all very friendly and nice. As they moved away, Sylvia saw many other servants who were present in that estate. They all bowed in greeting and respect. Randall, turning to the butler in a very nervous voice, said that they had not even left the infirmary yet, and asked, couldn't they have done this at least until they reached the hall? Walter, immediately smiling nervously, replied that that was what they had planned. However, the scoundrel had managed to get hurt on the way, and now he had ruined their whole plan. The head maid agreed with him and said that they generally wanted to greet their new mistress as soon as possible and show her everything. Randall, at this point sighing heavily, said that he could not understand why they were so energetic and enthusiastic at all. But Sylvia at that moment touched him with her hand and, smiling happily, thanked them for doing this. She also gave her full name and said that she was counting on their cooperation. The head maid immediately said that they would definitely help her settle in, so she didn't have to worry about anything. Some time passed from that moment, and the girl was brought into the room. The maid replied that these were her chambers, in which the previous duchess also lived. As soon as Sylvia looked around, she was very surprised. She also noticed a rather large painting and immediately asked what it was. The maid replied that it was a portrait of the previous duke, duchess, and the current duke. However, it could now be exchanged for a portrait of a girl with her master. Sylvia, when she looked at these people more closely, immediately thought that they were the previous owners of the estate. However, something made her wary. She remembered that she had already met them once in her past life. The girl was reborn again and again, and the villagers chased her, believing that she was a monster. And then one day, walking through the forest, she suddenly noticed a couple of people who were fighting with some flying creatures. She just watched this for a while, and then she walked up to the young couple and helped them deal with these monsters using her magic. Alice also warned that they should never visit such deserted places alone again, and practically without weapons. Walking away from them, she said that she was not sure. However, if you go to the east, you can get to the main road. It was time for her to go, so she said goodbye to them. However, the man asked her to stop and at least tell them his name. The girl was very surprised to hear this and just looked at them for a while. And then, sighing heavily, she replied that it would be better for him if she did not know him or anyone else. She asked him not to talk about her anymore and not to mention what they had seen that day. Sylvia had thought that, despite their modest attire, their manners betrayed their high birth. But now that she saw them, she realized that they were a duke and duchess after all. At this moment, the headmaid was very surprised, because the girl simply could not take her eyes off the painting and thought that she must have been staring at the duke because he really was very cute as a child. But Sylvia only thought about the fact that the child of the couple she had saved had now become her husband, and she did not understand what kind of jokes God was playing on her, because nothing like this had ever happened to her before. When evening came, the maid prepared a hot bath for her mistress and asked if the water was too hot for her. The girl immediately replied that the temperature was just perfect. The maids also said that they had prepared aromatic oil especially for her and asked if she liked it or if she would like to change it. Sylvia, who was very happy with the hot bath, immediately replied that she liked it very much. The scent was simply delicious, and it felt so nice on her skin. As soon as the maids heard this, they immediately rejoiced. They were very pleased that the choice they had made pleased their mistress. They immediately began showering her with compliments about how beautiful she was and how pleasant she was to talk to. Sylvia smiled and asked if perhaps they should give her this appearance as a gift, since they liked it so much. One of the maids immediately laughed and said that she was a real joker. However, in reality, she really would like to live for a day with her beautiful appearance. At that moment, Sylvia thought that it was her wedding night that was supposed to happen that day. She also really hoped that everything would go well and preferably very quickly. She also really hoped that her new husband would not turn out to be some kind of pervert in bed who would be insatiable. Otherwise, she would have to knock him out, because she was not going to allow a man any such passions. When everything was finally ready, Sylvia walked up to the bedroom and stopped. She thought that she needed to finish it in an hour and go to bed, because she was already very tired and wanted to rest. After the bath, the girl looked even more beautiful. She was dressed in a silk shirt that had been prepared by the Delma, and her hair was perfectly combed so that it fell beautifully on her shoulders. When the girl opened the door, she immediately saw her husband, who was also wearing a silk robe and was simply sitting silently, looking down. Randall was very awkward and uncomfortable with what was about to happen. As soon as the girl opened the door, he immediately looked in her direction, and seeing her beautiful appearance, he was very surprised. He only greeted her, and Sylvia paid attention to his muscular chest, which was peeking out from under the neckline of his robe. The girl, coming closer to him, immediately smiled, said that she came to see him, and she herself drew attention to the fact that this guy was in very good shape. And this was nice. Before they got down to business, the man turned to her and said he wanted to talk to her about something. Sylvia sat down on the bed and immediately said she was ready to listen to him. However, pointing to the seat next to her, she asked if he wanted to sit closer because the guy was sitting opposite her and felt very uncomfortable. Even though he didn't like it, he still listened to his wife and sat down next to her. It took a lot of effort on his part, and his face even turned a little red. He glanced at the girl and thought that she had been through so much that day, so it would be better for her to have a peaceful night so that her mental state could calm down a little. He understood that even if His Majesty became a bridge between them, it was better not to rush into the wedding night before at least some real feelings had developed between them, so that it would not be so awkward. He decided that everything was decided, and was about to tell her not to worry, but to just rest, when suddenly Sylvia's hand reached for his robe and began to take it off. The man was incredibly surprised, and jumping away from her, immediately asked what she was doing. The girl looked at him in surprise, not understanding what had happened, and immediately asked why he was so angry. Sylvia explained that she wanted him to continue talking and that she would simply start undressing him so as not to waste any more time. He asked in a trembling voice, was she really going to undress him? The girl said that was exactly it. However, he asked why she was doing this because he really did not understand why. However, Sylvia, looking him straight in the eyes, said in a quiet voice that this was their marital duty and she was obliged to do it. But Randall asked her to stop because the girl had already started to lay him down on the bed and was moving closer to him. He said that he didn't want her to force herself to do it because of these outdated concepts like marital duty, it could all be very uncomfortable and unpleasant, so he didn't want that to happen. Sylvia, continuing to approach him, said that she was not forcing herself at all, but considered it her duty. Randall, looking at her with horror, said that this was the whole problem. She didn't even like him, so he thought it was very wrong. However, Sylvia interrupted him and said that she actually liked him. As soon as the guy heard these words, his face turned red and he was very surprised. The guy lay there for a while and looked at her, after which he asked her to get off him, because this position really embarrassed him. The girl immediately asked in surprise, "Is he really ashamed that she is on top?" and said that in that case she could be on the bottom? The man even started to sweat from all these worries and asked her to just get off him, and then they could talk everything over. As soon as she looked at him like that, she realized that his image even seduced her for a second, and assumed that it was because of his handsome appearance. But she didn't even notice it. Then she assumed that she was putting too much pressure on this poor guy, who had such vulnerable feelings, and decided that it would be better to get off. Sylvia immediately said that in that case she would do nothing and get off. However, at that moment she accidentally slipped her foot on the robe and fell right on his chest with her face. This made him feel even more uncomfortable, and he immediately thought that it was because she had been shocked during the day and probably now couldn't even keep her balance. But then the guy thought that maybe something had touched her, and that was why she was hurt. He realized that he had been very inattentive, and she had never seen anything like that in her entire life. Now, hastily tired, it is not surprising that her mind was awakened. The girl actually lost consciousness, so he turned to Walter and Dell already wanted them to do something, but then suddenly fell silent. He heard a snoring sound coming from the girl, and looking more closely, he noticed that she was simply sleeping and not unconscious. Of course, he was very surprised by this. However, he sighed heavily and immediately calmed down, because he was already worried that something was wrong with her. He also thought that she was lying in a very awkward position, and that she would be uncomfortable like this. So he decided to shift a little to the side, and as soon as he tried to do this, Sylvia grabbed his shirt, as if to make it clear that she did not want any movement. He laid his head on the pillow and thought that he definitely wouldn't be able to sleep well tonight. However, he decided that it wasn't a problem, in principle. A whole night had passed since then, and when Sylvia woke up, she immediately saw that the man was also awake. For some time, she did not understand what was happening. He immediately smiled and asked how she had slept. The girl's first question was whether they had done what they were supposed to. Randall, of course, was very upset by this. He started shouting at her loudly and said that he would never touch a person who was fast asleep, especially considering that he had no intention of doing so. As soon as she heard this, she immediately said that she understood everything. And the man at that moment, rolling her to the other side, said that if she was not injured anywhere, then he would like her to move away a little. But Sylvia immediately replied that she hadn't really meant that, and covering her mouth with her hand, even blushed a little. She said that she had wondered if she had attacked him. The man didn't respond to this because he simply didn't know what to say, because he understood that it could hurt her a little. So he decided to just keep quiet. For a long time, he himself wondered what kind of girl she was, because in most cases, he did not understand her. When it was time for breakfast, the girl had already changed her clothes and tidied herself up, and also went down to the dining room, where a huge table with food was set. She asked why the table was so big. The man explained that she was very tired last night, so he asked her to prepare all the most useful things to properly restore her energy. Randall also said that for her own comfort, he had sent the servants out of the drawing room, and so she could now eat in peace. The girl, looking at this huge table, did not understand. Were they doing anything? As far as she remembered, no. So she did not understand at all why she needed to restore energy. She clearly remembered falling asleep before it even started at home. She could barely eat once, let alone 3 meals a day, and with such a variety of dishes. Sylvia looked at the man in surprise, and he was very happy at that moment and thought that now she would finally be able to eat normally under his supervision. This was very important to him. The girl herself did not understand why he was looking at her with the gaze of a grandmother who wanted to fatten her up this summer. She was silent for a while, then asked when they would spend their wedding night, which was supposed to have happened last night. She also apologized for falling asleep so quickly. That was just how her body was. As soon as Randall heard this, he was very surprised. He even choked a little on his tea, and while wiping his shirt, he turned to her. The man said that he had already told her more than once that he did not want her to be pressured by old customs. He did not intend to do this without her own desire. Then the girl said that she would be called a duchess who could not even fulfill her marital duty. She never touched her food. But the man tried to calm her down and said that in the north, there are no such frivolous people who chat right and left. She can be sure of this and not worry. Sylvia looked at him with distrust, but thought that the man was quite correct. However, he was still a completely naive child. Alice dedicated herself to saving people, and those who betrayed her were precisely these yellow people, who simply began to be afraid of something and did not even want to listen to her. She couldn't believe that he really thought that the Duchess, who had recently entered the family and had not done her duty on her wedding night, would not be slandered behind her back. When she drank some tea, she thought that the guy was either too naive for this life or still a completely immature child who had never been in difficult situations and therefore did not have the necessary experience. So she approached Randall and said she had something she wanted to make him. She wanted to make a deal with him. She understood that she had to deceive God in order to die prematurely, so she did not go out. We play the role of the ideal wife. She believed that he was the one who should hasten her death. As soon as the man heard about the deal, he was very surprised and asked what she had. Sylvia immediately explained that since he claimed that he could not spend his wedding night with a man for whom he had no feelings, she would like them to try to love each other. Hearing this, he choked again and could not believe that she was actually saying such things. The girl calmly said that first they needed to get used to touching. She suggested that she would touch him whenever she wanted, and he could ask her for whatever he wanted every time. Randall knew it might be too awkward, but he still had to clarify and asked where exactly she wanted to touch him. The girl giggled and said that she would like to start with her hand and then see how it goes. The man, of course, was not against this, because he really understood that he would have to spend a lot of time with this girl, and he wanted her to be not indifferent to him, so he agreed to this deal. Sylvia was a little surprised, but very happy. She said that he decided even faster than she expected, but that was even better. She also asked the man what he wanted from her in return. At that moment, the guy came closer to her and stopped right in front of her with a big smile on his face. He put some extremely unattractive and even smelly dish on her plate and said that it was their family's special healthy food, so he wanted her to eat it all. He explained that this would be his condition. As soon as Sylvia heard this, she did not understand how it was possible to create such a cruel desire. When some time had passed and breakfast was finally over, they decided to go for a short walk to stretch their bones. And as Randall had wanted, he was going to walk her more often. And so while they were walking, the guy kept laughing, but he tried to cover this laughter with his hand and tried to do it very quietly. Sylvia held his hand and suddenly, frowning, asked him to stop laughing because there was nothing wrong with it. He turned to her and immediately asked for forgiveness, but still could not stop because it was too funny for him. In fact, he still couldn't get over the breakfast, because he couldn't imagine that such an unshakable person like her would be defeated by just one dish. He also considered the fact that her desire was to hold her hand, and suggested that perhaps he was being too distant and that she even considered him perhaps closed. But even if it was an arranged marriage, he wouldn't refuse if she asked him to, so they held hands and tried to show more emotion towards each other. But he considered this not even bad, because if Sylvia turned out to be a spy for the king, then she would always be in his sight, and he would be able to keep a good eye on her in order to prevent it quickly if anything happened. Despite all this, he felt a little ashamed about it, because he understood that in some way it was wrong. When Sylvia looked at him again with an angry look, he stopped laughing and said that he had completely forgotten that the vassals were due to arrive in 4 days. She looked at him in surprise and immediately asked if he meant the banquet, and also said that this would be their first official meeting together as a married couple. The man said that this is indeed the case, and that is what everyone is worried about. But they are simply at least devoted, so they want to meet the girl as soon as possible and perhaps settle some issues. He explained that it would be a small banquet, so she didn't need to worry too much about it, and also that Dalma would help her. And if she needed anything, she could tell the butler about it. They would do everything. Sylvia, hearing this, was a little surprised, but she realized that the mistress of the house was the one who was involved in such activities. She had been in past lives, so this would not be difficult for her. However, in reality, she really didn't want to do this, because she simply didn't see the point in all this. But her husband said that, of course, he would do everything in her power, and this answer suited him. Then they continued walking, strolling through the garden, holding hands. The man said that he had other things to do, so the next time they would see each other was at dinner, and he was forced to leave her alone. Sylvia, smiling happily, wished him luck and even called him her dear, and also said that she was already looking forward to their meeting. As soon as Randall heard this, he immediately felt a little awkward. His heartbeat even quickened, and he just stood there for a while. The girl at that moment walked forward and thought that this was her revenge for the terrible dish that he made her eat, and she was very pleased with herself. Immediately after this, the man went to a village that was nearby in the Duchy of Belfort. He met the little children they had seen on the battlefield, and when they ran up to him and started clapping happily, he saw they were full of energy and said it was great. The boys immediately began to rejoice in the gentleman and even asked him to play with them, ride them on his neck and all that sort of thing. He called them scoundrels and asked them to remember who was in front of them. Then he turned to the dark-haired boy and asked him to listen carefully. He said that last time they were very lucky that they were close, but next time they better play in places that are under a protective seal, because there was no protective barrier in that place and it could be very dangerous. The boy was a little embarrassed at this point. He felt ashamed of what he had done, but he explained that they usually didn't play in the forest. The Duke, hearing this, was very surprised and immediately asked why they were there then. The boy explained that Mom and Dad always went to the same part of the other forest to get medicinal herbs, but they were destroyed, which made Mom and Dad very upset, and he didn't want to just help them bring these medicines from that forest. Randall said that he understood everything now and also apologized for yelling at him a little, saying that he didn't know about it, and also replied that it was very noble of them to do that, but next time they better be more careful and careful. The boys did not object. They talked about something with the gentleman for a while, and then left, waving goodbye to him and saying that they were very happy to communicate with him. The man in turn was very happy with this communication. He waved his hand at them, and after that he suddenly became very serious. He didn't know that in the forest near the village, a herb garden was actually being destroyed, and this made him very wary. Of course, knights always dealt with all wild animals, but he could not believe that they could be monsters. However, a special protective seal was installed around the village's perimeter, which was supposed to keep these monsters from getting close. He decided that he definitely needed to check just in case, so he gathered a team of knights and went to that territory and, after explaining everything to them, asked if they understood everything. The knights immediately said with one voice that everything was clear and that they would do it as best they could. Randall also said that there might be monsters in this forest. Until they make sure that the barrier is working, they should not let down their guard and always be on the alert. When everyone had asked their questions and everything was cleared up, the man said that in that case they could go, and the people divided into several groups in order to cover as much of the perimeter as possible. As soon as Randall entered a rather dark part of the forest, he noticed that people began to come to this place less often, and because of this, the area became gloomy. The people, when they had finished checking, gathered again in the same place, and the knights said that they had not found anything, and also added that everything was fine, just like with the barrier. Peach, hearing this, was very surprised, because 4 out of 5 places were normal. Only one remained to check, a protective stone, which was in the middle of the forest. It was a rather creepy place, so he did not feel very comfortable going there. However, he gathered absolutely all the knights, and they went there as a team. He warned them to be ready, and if necessary, to attack. The moment they approached this magical stone, they noticed that it was shrouded in some kind of black darkness. The guy was very surprised and did not understand how the protective stone could crack in the middle. He understood that this could be very dangerous, and for some time he simply thought about what he needed to do. Then he heard some strange sound not far from him, and turning his head to the side, he saw a huge long snake, which was a monster, flying straight at him. The boy immediately turned to the knights and told them to duck. At this time, Sylvia was sitting quietly in the estate and drinking tea, trying to occupy herself with something. She suddenly noticed that a crack had appeared on the cup, and this surprised her very much. She did not understand how this was possible because she had not even squeezed this cup very hard. At that very time, there was a battle with a monster in the forest, and there were several of them. When the Duke managed to kill a couple, he saw another one and asked if he was the last one. After he killed him, he immediately turned to one of the knights and asked if there were any casualties. The guy replied that there was, of course, a small injury, but no one was seriously hurt, so everything was fine. He said that it was good, and also asked that all the wounded be sent to the estate, and the Duke himself remained there in the forest and came closer to the magic crystal. He touched the stone and noticed that it had quite clear cuts, and this, of course, surprised him. These monsters had a very low level of intelligence, and would not have been able to leave such a smooth, clear crack. And he knew that there was more than just a demon involved in this. If a demon had appeared, Austin's barrier would have definitely reacted to it and let them know. Then thinking, he said that it turns out that this is all the power of darkness, and the knights, hearing this, were immediately very surprised and began to whisper among themselves. He said that there was nothing human about them, they were capable of doing just that, so he asked them to also inform the other knights. Randall looked at all his assistants with a serious look and said that he wanted them to send him lists of everyone entering each individual territory of the duchy, as well as people who left it. He believed that they needed to be found before they could harm the inhabitants themselves, so this matter was very urgent and important. At that very moment, one of the younger maids came to Sylvia and told her mistress that Delma was calling her. Hearing this, the girl immediately said that she would come to her, and after finishing her tea, she actually went down to the hall, where the senior maid was already waiting for her. She came to the banquet hall of their main palace, and the maid replied that like most castles in the empire, this castle was also sponsored by the previous emperor, due to the fact that the duke was of royal blood. The woman explained that thanks to him, the castle was able to acquire such a beautiful appearance, and many aristocrats who came to these formal events were delighted. Sylvia wasn't surprised at all when she heard this, because she was just wondering why everything in this place was so old-fashioned. It turns out that they had only recently started renovating, so it was quite obvious. With a heavy sigh, the girl said that banquet halls are the main gathering place for guests, and it wouldn't hurt to improve it a little more, of course. And the maid, hearing this, immediately became happy. She said that she knew the woman would say so, and called a man from the trade guild. Very soon he should arrive and help them. Sylvia really wanted to do this, but she was incredibly lazy and was going to refuse. However, now that a special person had already been invited, she simply had no choice. And so some time passed from that moment, and the very same person who was supposed to consult them arrived at the estate. They met in the drawing room, and the man bowed and greeted the Duchess of Belfort, saying that he was very glad to meet her. The man also said that he was the head of the Sherville Trade Guild, and his name was Chick Hekla. The girl, smiling happily, said that she was very grateful to him for his visit, and also said that he could sit down now. The man did just that, and he was actually very surprised, because he didn't expect Sylvia to be so beautiful.